So on behalf of Adam, who is out to lunch with Oscar Tang and Agnes Tang, I want to say welcome again to the Fairbanks, and what a great day for the Fairbanks Museum and the community. We have a terrific group of people who are joining us, and I'm going to shut up because I want them to be able to speak. So if I can turn it, this man needs no introduction, but I will turn it first to the Senator and then to our Deputy Undersecretary.
Well, thank you so much. We're so proud of you. Local girl makes mostly good. She's not that good a girl, you know. She's got another side to her we don't want to hear. I'm kidding. We love you. You know that. And Farrah, it's so nice of you to come. And I just love being up in the kingdom because there's so many people doing so much good work and just doing the best you can to move ahead and revitalize the community and create the connections in the community that we need. You know, being an umbrella was just wonderful today, and meeting folks who are, you know, being there for so many folks in the kingdom who need some help and are getting their lives improved. And then housing obviously is a critical issue. I mean, it's just unreal what pressure is on families. You know, when my partner Donald Graham and I started in 1974. You were here before me, but I didn't have a problem getting housing. You know, when I first came to White River Junction, went over to Mrs. Follett's, and she had a room in the attic, $125 a month. And I was off and running, and I was able to, you know, afford to start buying a car. You can't do that now. You literally can't. So it's not, quote, just low-income housing. It's housing for everybody. And you all see that, and you see the repercussions of it. You know, that lack of security that we all need to have a place where we can go to and are not freaking out as the end of the month comes and the rent's due or the mortgage is due. So, and it's around the country now. It's not just in Vermont, but we've got added pressures. The COVID, this has become a second home market. The Airbnb, I mean, all those things add up to taking properties off the market and making it tough for people who live here to have an affordable place. So we've got to have policies that help you all be successful. You're on the front lines, and this will be an ongoing area of concern for me, for Bernie, and for Becca, because there's got to be some federal support for sensible policies to deal with the reality of workforce housing. So thank you. And Farrah?
Yeah. Well, it is so nice to be here, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I do want to thank the Senator for his support and leadership on the Ag Committee, and when we think about a rural champion, you are the top of the list, so really appreciate your advocacy, not just for here in Vermont, but for better rural policy writ large across the federal government. And also to Sarah. Sarah has been such an amazing advocate for Vermont. You know, Sarah is a politically appointed state director for rural development. We have 47 state directors that cover all the states, and I think I talked to Sarah more than anyone else. And it used to be her calling me all the time, but you know, there's been a change, which is now I call her, and I call her because sometimes I have an idea. You know, hey, should we shift our policy this way? What if we did it this way? And I call Sarah, I really do. And I ask her, do you think this will work? Like, give me the perspective. You know, I was a practitioner of community development long ago, but I've been in the policy space for a while, and I need some ground truthing. And Sarah has really been that champion for me to make sure that our ideas are good ones and that they're workable if we're gonna make a shift to help build rural prosperity. So I wanna thank you for your leadership. And it is a true story. I did sing karaoke at Charlie O's many years ago on my first trip to Vermont. It was and is an incredible place with incredibly kind people and amazing leadership. And I will say, when Ben and I worked together years ago at USDA Rural Development, you know, we formed, I think, a respect and friendship for each other over the phone. There was no video, you know, calls back then, and he was in Vermont, I was in DC, and I looked to him at that time as an amazing leader who had really innovative ideas for how to change and improve the practice of rural development. I think at that time we even helped fund a cheese cave, if I remember correctly, or something to that effect.
You'll see it. It's good cheese.
It's good cheese. And so it's so nice to get to continue to work with you all. But one thing I just want to share at the top here before we get the conversation started is it is true that we are trying to look for better and more creative solutions. We know that our programs at Rural Development can be a little clunky, and not always the easiest to work with. And it's a testament to you all who are working around them and between them, pulling them in where you can, but where we can be a better partner in investing in creative solutions that we can learn from here, and then try to make some changes so that we can share those best practices with your neighbors and with states across the country. We really want to do that. I think this administration is really invested in learning and growing and then shifting rural policy based on that evidence. So I'm really excited to hear from you all today and some of the solutions that are working right here in Vermont. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we're going to start with St. Johnsbury. So Chad, if you'll kick us off, and since you guys are lined up really well, we'll go Patrick, Amanda, we'll skip you, Chris, because you're with us for the rest of the day, and then we'll keep going around. So if you don't mind just taking a few moments, tell us about either the problem and the challenge and the obstacle, or the creative new project or program that you're trying to really get off the ground.
Yeah, sure. I'm Chad Whitehead, St. Johnsbury's town manager. Thank you, Senator, for being here. We really appreciate. Without the REAP zone funding, without I'm not going to turn this into an infrastructure project or conversation, I promise. But without that REAP zone funding, St. Johnsbury wouldn't even have a shot. I mean, we've got all that underground infrastructure that we've done over the years. I think we're in like the $40 million that we've done in infrastructure. We probably have another 40 to go. And for rural communities like St. Johnsbury, to be able to do those, to meet clean water requirements, to meet the drinking water requirements without those funds, this wouldn't happen. So St. Johnsbury is a hub community, and I think about, this was my first year as town manager, so it was 2015, and that other senator guy was here. And USDA was here. We're standing on the steps of the Athenaeum, and the former governor from South Dakota said to me, he's like, so St. Johnsbury is full-time fire, you have full-time police, you got a 24/7 dispatch, you got one of the largest water systems in the state. He's like, what's your population? And I said, there were 7,600 at the time. Yeah. And he's like, no offense. He goes, but you are fighting way out of your weight class. He's like, I got cities with 30,000 people that don't have any of this. And so for us to be able to afford all those things that we have come to enjoy, our full-time fire, our full-time police, we need to grow our population. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We need to serve a larger population. We're talking about with our fire regionalization, how do we serve our surrounding communities. Our taxes are high. Our burden on our taxpayers to have all these amenities are pretty high. And we want our population to grow. We want people to come into the downtown and invest in our housing stock. But we're providing these services to outside communities too. And so we really need to see growth in all sectors of housing in St. Johnsbury. And Patrick's a great partner here with the Rural Edge, working on the affordable housing pieces of things. And I know he also recognizes that all areas of housing need to be injected and brought up, but it's kind of a challenge. And Joe, I think a little bit later on, is going to talk a little bit about a couple of the programs that the town has developed to try to help the housing stock turn around. We have old housing stock that's had deferred maintenance for a number of years, and how do we incentivize people to improve in that and invest in that and make our housing stock better all the way across the boards? And so that's one of our challenges.
All right. Thank you. We'll keep going and then
Good afternoon. I'm Patrick Shattuck. I'm the Executive Director of Rural Edge. I think when we had the groundbreak or the ribbon cutting for this event, Senator, you met with us for a tour of New Avenue, just a few blocks from here, but 40 units in a great historic project that has been a catalyst for change in the town. And I think that as we as a housing provider look at that, we've got so many communities across the kingdom, large and small. How do we work with the communities, the leaders, to create those projects? You mentioned the Cheese Cave. Last night, I spent my evening in Greensboro, where we are looking at housing to make sure they have employees to keep those cheese caves filled. I'm going Tuesday night to Canaan, where we're having conversations with communities about making sure that we address the needs across the kingdom for the diverse populations. We did really have a great success this year in opening up a homeless shelter for the kingdom. We were able to get it up 6 weeks ago, and how important it is to think of the most vulnerable, our most vulnerable neighbors, but across the spectrum. We're also looking at a huge project in Newport, which we hope to close in 3 months at the former Sacred Heart school site, where we'll have 26 tax credit units combined as part of a larger 43-unit development, and 24 units of affordable home ownership through a renovation of the school itself. So just looking at opportunities across the kingdom, and just know how important it is, all the partners around the table, the residents, the elected officials. You know, here in St. Johnsbury, there's not a week goes by that I don't meet with Joe or Chad, and we look at ways that our efforts can complement each other. You know, we've got a site, I don't know, 4 doors from here, where we hope to be building 26 new units in the big empty lot right across from the Armory. And so that we think of synergy and working together. So you think of the investment here and our new building and the Armory, and it really goes to show the impact that our collective efforts can have.
This guy, Rural Edge is doing a really great job. I will say, just thank you to Patrick and his team for doing awesome work. Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Cochran. I'm the Executive Director of Umbrella. We're a little bit of an outlier in this particular group. We're a social service organization. Our mission is to cultivate a Northeast Kingdom where all people thrive, free from abuse and oppression. So a lot of the work we do centers around domestic and sexual violence and supporting survivors, as well as other community programs. So I was just going to share a little bit about what we see as challenges and obstacles that people face, especially, you know, let's say somebody is in our emergency shelter and now they're looking for permanent housing or housing that they can move into with their family. We mostly serve women with children. And those obstacles are, you know, things like that you'll hear from other organizations like NECA and others, including, you know, having a Section 8 voucher, right? Having some of these vouchers, but not actually finding housing. But also, even if you find housing, a lot of our local landlords, they're small, they only have a couple, you know, they might only have several units. They're not actually wanting to take that, and I know that they kind of need to, but they don't, and then there's no repercussions for that, so people are kind of left holding a Section 8 voucher but having no housing. We also have people with a lot of difficulty, you know, a lot of challenges in their histories around rental history. You know, things have happened maybe because of their abusive partner or otherwise for their addiction they might be experiencing, and then now they aren't being accepted, and so we try to support them and with our partners to make that work for them, try to make relationships with landlords so that they understand a little bit more, but it's a challenge. In terms of visioning and dreaming, I think I would just share, I shared a little bit about this previously, but we're just seeing such an increased connection between addiction, trauma. You know, we're about 80 to 90% of people that are coming into our shelters or coming into our doors are also experiencing substance use disorder. So it's just so connected, and unfortunately so much of the funding that funds our kinds of programs are siloed, and so substance use funding goes here, domestic violence funding's here, you know, community development funding is here, but how can we de-silo that? And so we're hoping we're doing a needs assessment right now, we got some funding, to look at in our community what are survivors really dealing with in terms of their addiction and their needs and what's not there for them. And so we're hoping that will springboard us into a project that will involve integrating some of our recovery services with some of our housing services that we offer. So.
We're gonna, I think, skip a few folks here. Yes?
Wait, you don't want to skip.
Well, this is for this for the rest of the day.
Oh, we're gonna skip
Leaned
this.
on
Okay.
it.
I was just gonna sing, so.
Yeah, we'll get the karaoke machine. So Jody, would you like to speak to the creative economy?
Thank you so much for having me. So Jody Freed, Executive Director at Catamount Arts. Also wear a couple other hats as the Director for the Vermont Leadership Institute, and then also a longtime member of the Northeast Kingdom Collaborative, which I bring those up because the Collaborative and the REAP Zone, I don't think are, you know, they've been intertwined since the beginning, and I've been working on that for a couple of decades, and the funding that's come in from the REAP Zone into this region, tens of millions of dollars towards infrastructure, continues to be incredibly important. And so
I think that message, if we can convey that today, that the need for that here is important, and we need to carry that forward across all of the different sectors. We hear it across all the different sectors, the impact that it's having. At the Vermont leadership level, Leadership Institute level, we just had our session 5 in Montpelier, and I can tell you that the subject across every single person in that room that came in, guests from the legislature, all of the branches of government, it was housing, housing, housing. Right. And that comes back to what we're seeing in our own region and this roundtable. But I think in the context of the overall state situation, we not only are a reflection of that, but I think perhaps our ability to solve that is going to be much more dependent on programs like the REAP zone than some of the other areas where they have the stronger access to market capital. So the REAP zone, USDA, the importance to what we're talking about in terms of the housing problem that is statewide, but here in these rural areas like the Northeast Kingdom, this is going to be critical to the solution as we move forward. In terms of Catamount Arts and the arts side, I'll just bring up one example where we're working, and I don't want to steal the thunder from Rob, and we can go back and forth if you want. You want to talk about your project, and then I can chime in? Can I pass it down? Is that okay?
You can do whatever.
All right, I'm going to toss it if you...
I think, why don't you run and I'll catch up at the end, because I have my own little thing that I need to make sure I cover.
Okay. All right. Well, sounds good. So,
I'm well positioned.
There you go. So we're working with the Northern Forest Center and other partners on the 560 Railroad Street project down there, which is going to create 10 units that are going to be going to help us create take away the void of workforce housing market rate in town, right in our downtown. And as part of that, we're working to create a project where the arts and the magic that we bring in terms of arts and culture into that project so that the building itself becomes a canvas. We're going to have murals on the walls. We're going to have gallery space inside. We're going to have on the outside pedestals for three-dimensional sculptures. And then we're going to actually be a partner renting one of the street side spaces that is going to be a working studio for artists and residents. And we're going to have a 900 square foot apartment that opens from the studio that we can have the residents, when they come into town, spend a month or 2 months working there and creating this amazing, vibrant piece of artwork in the middle of our downtown. And then it will change, and it will bring a vibrancy to that project that hopefully will allow it to thrive and become a model that we can replicate throughout other areas in the Northeast Kingdom where we've really put arts, culture, and the creative economy at the forefront of what we're doing. And as a piece of our economic development strategy. So it ties in with the housing, and I think it's a great place as we look to our funding mechanism to look to see this as a great pilot that could be replicated as we move forward. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Joe.
Great, well, thank you. I'm Joe Kasperzak. I'm the Assistant Town Manager here in the town of St. Johnsbury. Chad kind of queued up a couple of items I'd like to mention. The idea of growing our population. I was happy to hear that at a summit here at Burke Mountain with the Vermont Futures and their target on 802,000 people in the state of Vermont. Here we're looking at maybe a target of 8,500. So the drive to 85. We're at 73. In our heyday in the 1940s, we're at 9,300. So we think this is perfectly reasonable. And we think it's critical in order to be able to pay for the growing costs of providing the essential services. And of course, to get there, you need good quality housing, and you need that for all folks. So our commitment in St. John's, we like to think that we've been proactive. In 2018, we brought realtors and property managers and landlords together and had the discussion about code compliance, which means rental housing inspection programs and registration fees. And you can well imagine that was a challenging discussion, but our community embraced it. And today we run just over 1,400 rental units through our registration program, which is about 99% that register that we're aware of. So that's been really successful. We take half of the funds that we get from that program and we dump it into a program called the Rental Housing Grant Improvement Program. And these are pretty small micro grants. They typically range in the area of $3,000 that required a $3,000 match. But over the first 4 years of this, we have invested $200,000 in grants that's leveraged over $1.2 million in improvements to our existing stock, with also some new housing stock creation. ARPA funding, we received just over $2 million in ARPA that we turned into what we call our St. Johnsbury Revitalization Fund. Over $1 million was dedicated to housing projects here in St. Johnsbury. And we took 200,000 of that and inserted that into that grant program, that micro grant program. And this year, we will have 20 new units, rental housing units, net new, in St. Johnsbury that's funded through that program.
Wow, that's great.
We talk about our partnership with Rural Edge. We collaborate with Rural Edge all the time, team with their programs. We allow our funding to be used with their funding. And we're seeing Rural Edge adding 15 or 20 new units to downtown St. Johnsbury and St. Johnsbury community every year. So that's potentially 40 net new units annually. So we think that's significant. We also are partnered with the Northern Forest Center and some of their housing projects and several other public-private housing projects that we're just at the beginning stages of. But it's an exciting time, and it's certainly necessary if we're going to hit our goal of 85.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Joe.
I'm Ben Doyle from the Preservation Trust. It's good to see you again. I was just reflecting on the fact that I was in this room in the 3rd grade when I would come from field trips from Sutton School, Sutton Elementary. Proud graduate, K through 8. And I just want to say thank you for your leadership on making this project happen. It's really important. But I was also just thinking about the housing challenges, and I think a lot of times we talk about the housing challenges in Chittenden County and even in hub communities like St. Johnsbury. But I think of the village that I grew up in Sutton, and what does affordable housing look like in a village? And I'm contractually obligated to be optimistic by nature, and I just am. And I really believe that thousands and hundreds of thousands of people are going to come to Vermont, and someday they will be here. And the question is, where will they go? And I think they can go to Chittenden County and try and find an apartment and not find one. They can sprawl, or they can just make a tight housing market even tighter. And I really believe that there's this incredible opportunity in villages like Sutton or Belvedere or Sheffield that have seen Glover, that have seen a 75-year economic decline, but that there's a historic settlement pattern there that builds community and that is ripe with opportunity. And I know that we were recently together at the East Calais General Store, which is an example of a community-supported enterprise where a nonprofit has purchased, renovated, has a store, but there's also 3 perpetually affordable apartments above that store. And really thanks to the leadership of the congressional delegation and Senator Leahy at the Preservation Trust in partnership with Vermont Council on Rural Development and the Community Foundation, we actually just signed a grant agreement with HUD this week for our Village Trust Initiative, which is going to do basically take the East Calais General Store project and replicate it 20 times in villages of 2,500 or fewer.
Really?
Yeah. And the idea is to take it.
Excited about that.
Yes, this is a very successful congressionally directed spending.
Well, no question. But that project, for example, was $2 million and had over 20 different funding sources in it and took 5 years. And that's too long and too many funding sources. And with this program, we're hoping to accelerate it and bring 20 sources down to 5. And the funding that we're able to bring from that congressionally directed spending will really be the launching pad. And I think the idea behind it is that in these rural communities that feel like they've been left behind, there needs to be, sorry for the pun, but trust. And there needs to be community and gathering places where people can come together to build social capital. And I think people will move to a town or a village when they can see themselves there and there's a place to live. And I just feel like creative programs like that I think are really an opportunity to really think about all kinds of housing across Vermont. And then the last very quick thing that I would just say is...
Very quick.
Yep. Nobody has done more for affordable housing for the individual than Diane Drown, who's sitting over there, the 504 queen of the kingdom, who has helped with the home repair program for people across the kingdom and is just a rock star.
That's great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work, all your support.
In housing, we often talk about the fact that there's a benefit cliff, meaning that our resources only help at a certain income level. I would just flag that we're heading also towards a real resource cliff in housing right now. Our state courageously put 17 to 18% of the one-time ARPA funding we received towards housing capital to construct new homes. Vermont needs around 30,000 new homes in a state of about 645,000 people. We need that to house Vermonters who are exiting homelessness. We need that to allow for an appropriate amount of immigration. We need that to replace our aging housing stock. And we need that for a stabilized vacancy rate so people have choices. So I can think of 4 things that have stood out in the last few years, what we've done from a creative capital standpoint. The first is a partnership launched by the Vermont State Treasurer to put $50 million of low interest debt onto the street to try to do some creative types of housing partnerships, including innovation and design. We need to make investments in upstream and how we're building buildings. In the United States, we haven't changed the way we build buildings or what we build them with in 100 years. So as an example, we've committed to funding 5 mass timber rental homes with that type of funding. We could not do that with our standard funding. The second is investments in home ownership in a way we have not done before. The state put $24 million into a pilot program to create home ownership that's modeled after the federal proposal called Neighborhoods Investment Act. We spend, by 2026, $80 billion a year on the Mortgage Interest Deduction Act. 76% of that goes to households earning above $100,000. 37% of that goes to households earning above $200,000. What if in the United States we followed that model of Vermont and put $24 million into home ownership development? We're creating 138 homes over 300 bedrooms, including Patrick's project. We don't have resources to invest in offsetting the tremendous increases in cost we've seen in development. Manufactured home communities are oftentimes a forgotten piece of our housing stock. In the United States, around 8% of Vermont's population live in manufactured home communities. Our state put $10 million into a creative pool to invest in infrastructure, water, wastewater. These are small city blocks, oftentimes on a relative island that don't have access to municipal infrastructure. So USDA has been a leader in this space. We can do more from a federal standpoint. And then finally, the last point is who builds housing matters. As we look towards the demographics in the northern New England, we're going to be a majority-minority nation by 2040. But when you look at projections, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine are not keeping up from an inclusivity standpoint, from a diversity standpoint, putting resources in as we have towards a BIPOC community developer program to try to get individuals who we need to move to this state involved in community development and building the housing we're building is critical.
Great.
Thank you.
Awesome time, Seth.
2 minutes.
Making up some time for others.
Yeah, I'll just, my name is Chris Cochran. I work for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I work in a group called Community Planning and Revitalization, and really the focus of our work is downtown and village vitality. But recently we've kind of taken a slant toward housing because really it's the housing stock and the number of people that we can have and host in our communities is key to keeping the community active and vital place. I'm mostly a State House actor, so thank you, Sarah, for getting me out of that building today. I love not having to wear the tie. It's great. But we've been chipping away at this. A lot of the problems are regulatory that we've experienced. I'm sure you probably read the headlines. We were the behind-the-scenes player in the Home Act that basically re-legalized the kinds of development that we see in St. Johnsbury that makes it so beautiful. St. Johnsbury was built before zoning, and it's a wonderful place. But over time, our zoning restrictions really kind of put a bell jar on our communities and didn't allow them to change. So we've worked to unlock, I think, the potential. Joe's talked about all the infrastructure investment that's been made. How do we use that? And using that existing infrastructure is one way to make housing more affordable. So while we've re-legalized kind of what we call missing middle or infill housing, now we're working, and I'm going to hand this over to Amy, my colleague, on an innovative project to kind of, I want to say, just socialize change. It's okay to have a new building in your community or in your neighborhood. Yeah. It's going to be okay. Yeah. A new neighborhood a new neighbor is going to be good for you. It's not a bad thing. And so we've been working in 5 pilot communities across the state to kind of just have these conversations to get communities to say yes to housing. I'm going to stop there. And
Great,
is that
thanks,
a good
Chris.
enough setup for you?
Yeah, thank you for being here. So I'm Amy Tomaso, Chris's colleague at the Department of Housing and Community Development. And so this Homes for All toolkit is the project he's speaking of, and it's to bring missing middle housing actually back to Vermont, because it was probably the original type of housing when Vermont was first settled, and then to really grow the next generation of small-scale home builders who are bringing units online one at a time, and that really adds up. And so this toolkit is the first of its kind. It's launching in less than a month on March 14th at a sold-out summit in Barrie. So the interest is huge, and I mean, this is how we're going to get the tools and resources in the hands of the small-scale developers around our state. The toolkit itself includes a design guide, so actually proposing 6 missing middle home typologies in Vermont based on Vermont vernacular architecture, so it's not too scary to see, this new kind of housing infill coming online. And it also has the 5 neighborhood infill case studies, but most importantly, it has a builder's workbook, which is a start to finish guide of how do you actually become a developer. That's such a key piece here. And then just next steps that are coming after the workbook launches is partnering with Seth and his team and having a cohort training for small-scale developers, having seed funding so that they can actually launch these projects. And then within the next few years, we hope to become the first state with a set of pre-construction plans that would be standardized across the state. That's kind of where this is headed. And so that will just help, cut the time down and energy and resources needed to permit and all the complicated parts of the development process, and have Vermont's set of plans. So we're really excited about it, and the toolkit, when it launches, will be free, open to all. So March 14th. That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Rob, we'll give you the last word, and then we'll open it up so we can have a dialogue.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Rob Rye with Northern Forest Center. We work across 4 states looking at diversifying and strengthening the forest economy, investing in local communities to have a vital place for young people in the future, and stewarding the forested landscape. I think the exhibit here is a great example of what we try to end up with in some of our projects, is how do you actually use wood from here, local labor, maintaining, keeping forests as forests, as Chris said, and then having some real key community institutions that embody that. We entered into the housing space through an innovation that I think many of us do, but sometimes we don't do well enough, by asking questions and then really, really listening to communities around what the problem was. And this actually happened in Millinocket, Maine, a former mill town, and we've replicated it in other places, where we understood that at that time, housing cost wasn't the issue, quality was. And we had for years and years looked that there was a problem in workforce, and there was a loss of jobs, and then suddenly the hospital was saying, actually, we've got 10 skilled nursing positions open that we can't recruit a person here for. So we actually are upside down from the old model of how we're looking at economic development. We said, well, what's the problem? We need quality rentals that have no encumbrance on income, because our skilled nurses actually make quite a bit of money. Right. So we said, well, okay, how do we step in and do that? So our innovation was actually stepping from an intermediary, if you will, a capacity builder partner, into an actual developer. Raising impact investment dollars from private sector, and then actually acquiring, managing, improving, and then ultimately selling back into the marketplace. Improved housing in town here, and many people have referenced it, is actually we were guided by local advisors to say, assess what are the different issues here. There was a property on Eastern Avenue. There were different ones in neighborhoods. But 560 at the north end of Railroad Street was an opportunity for a catalytic investment at the north end of town. But we had a 1910 building that had a pretty good price tag of $175,000, and an ownership that did not want to invest more money in it because it had lots of problems. And I think this is one of those things that's indicative of the built environment, right? It's beautiful, and yet it is that much more costly to take a building that means something to the community and bring it back into some viable use, particularly when you throw mixed use into it. Suddenly you're not eligible for certain things, and you look at making sure you're have a keen eye on affordability but not income restriction, then suddenly you're in a whole different space of, you're in the market sector. So we have seen a market that the market hasn't figured out, right? So we've decided to step in and do that. And the end goal that we're looking for is addressing the demographics problem. And this is really, how do we support, and we're not a housing organization, it's just one of our tools, right? Broadband, recreation, really dynamic businesses in the downtown. We need to be more competitive for young people, whether they want to stay here or come here. And that's one of the biggest issues that we can deal with. I think the second one that we've overcome, as I mentioned, was this cost of capital issue. Both on what was the cost of capital coming into projects. Our blended rate of capital is 1.5% based upon generous people who are saying, I want the right thing to happen. We're also being pushed by others to say that actually it's more like the market rate of return I want to get is more like 10%, because that's what the market will bear. Like, not these markets. Let's think about what we're talking about. I want to just quickly talk about the capacity and leadership issue. We've talked about this in the past. You and I have talked about what are those capacity programs that USDA has to really allow for organizations to do that intersectional work that Amanda was talking about. Like, there are very few programs to do that, and that's one key piece. The RCDI, the acronym soup, like the one thing, but I think the USDA team has been creative for building that in, but that is a lacking piece. And then the other thing I just want to mention, I'm sorry for talking so fast and cognizant of time, is that climate resiliency is a thing that we need to build into buildings, and we need to think about siting in a different way. Vermont is uniquely positioned. The northern forest that we work across, planning and zoning is a four-letter word, right? And we're trying to do this blocking and tackling instead of guiding growth, because I believe in what Ben is saying. It's going to happen. It's not happening right now. We're still trying to stem the loss. What is being purchased are second homes. People see the opportunity, but where's that next generation opportunity? We have to guide growth in a very different way. And I think that climate resiliency, we've got water, they're going to come, but how are we being smarter about building design? How do we make sure that historic preservation allows us to do that? Issue that we've discussed. No problem.
Yeah, we'll fix that. Yeah.
But I think this is really that bigger, complex thing around the systems the levers that we're able to pull on of capacity, capital, and then our ongoing reality that's changing in the face of some of the programs that I'd say that this administration is really trying to tackle through some challenging pipes, right? So I think that notion of how we're having these dialogues and looking at, and Sarah is a great example of connecting dots for innovative projects. She pulled in a Forest Service, the sister organization, to say, let's fund some of this work if we can't, and what do we learn? And I think that's great, because we're able to leverage that other departments and still get some of the type of dialogue going for what does it look like to build mass timber housing, single family housing now, along with multi-story. So, thank you.
That's great. So you all did a wonderful job. I apologize for being a mean facilitator. But we do now have a good chunk of time to have some questions from the Senator, from our Deputy Undersecretary, and some more dialogue about both solutions and obstacles. So if either of you want to kick us off, if not, I can do it.
Well, you know, the thing that has always been, the thing we have to do about housing is we've got to build more housing, right? There's all this talk about the various categories of the income and the cliffs, but we need more housing. And that's a consensus now, because before there was always an apprehension that build more housing essentially was a blank check to developers to do what they wanted to make more money. In fact, we need developers, right, to build more housing. You know, they've got to be our friends. So in order to build more housing, there's all kinds of barriers out there you've been talking about. So the legislature did something significant with its law on zoning. That obviously made a lot of sense. It's interesting what you're saying too. Without zoning, we had these really nice downtowns. So there's an element here where some tools like zoning and the permitting process have served a function. They're now getting in the way of an absolute necessity. And how do we make adjustments in those elements that are impediments to building, but not give license to what was the kind of building that Dean Davis was so concerned about when he was the champion of Act 250 back in the 60s. But I think we're on that. You know, I think you're getting a recognition that, hey, we've got to deal with that. The other thing that gives me like a headache when I go to these projects, like when we were in East Calais, like 20 funding sources, I mean, kill me, right? I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
No, it's truly, in a volunteer, it's just astonishing to me. And that's not a sustainable long-term operation when we need as much as we have. So there's a huge role for the federal government. There's got to be some policy and some money from the federal government to help. There's a huge role for the local folks. in the state with avoiding inflicting impediments that don't serve a broader purpose, but do really make the cost of housing, the time it takes to increase. There's a lot of design challenges, like how do we start building in a new way? And then, you know, there's the thing that's troubling to me is that this income inequality that we have, it's really intensifying what you said. If you're a developer and you can make more money going to a gated community and building, that's where you're going to go. It's just the way it is. That's why there does have to be these other policies. Because Vermont, it worries me, you know, that it becomes very attractive for people where price is just not an issue. And the people we need to work there, like the folks who work in Stowe, for instance, they live in the kingdom, a lot of those folks. I mean, that's a brutal drive and it's not sustainable. So, you know, what is exciting to me is that there, I think, is a collective awareness that, hey, we've got to build more. What are the things that we need to do? What are the things that we need to undo in order to get there? So, you know, I appreciate all of your efforts on it, but this is like job one. You said everybody talks about it, and that's all I hear about. So, thank you. Farah?
Yeah. I'll just say that, you know, this is a really incredible discussion, and, you know, part of my job is to visit with rural communities across this country, and this is very similar to the conversations we're having out west or in the Delta. And the thing that, I know we all kind of define it a little bit differently, but workforce housing, broadly speaking, is the #1 issue that I hear across the country, no matter if, you know, you're in the state of California or in Vermont. And it is one thing that, you know, regrettably, like, we're not always best positioned at USDA to tackle that challenge. I see a lot of nodding heads, right? Like, your program doesn't work here, your program doesn't work there. A lot of our programs are really tailored towards low and very low income households, which of course is a critical need, and we need affordable housing there, both multifamily housing and, you know, an entree to home ownership. But there's this squeeze, and sometimes we, you know, this is a little bit of a vicious cycle, because we're investing in economic development, we're investing in creating jobs, supporting businesses, infrastructure that create the amazing foundation for a community, but then there's nowhere to live, or you're driving 2 or 3 hours into a community back and forth at best. And so it is a tough nut to crack, and I don't have all of the solutions to that, but I am sort of curious around the table, you know, if you, for those of you who are more familiar with rural development programs, you know, if you could wave a magic wand, if you were undersecretary for the day, actually not undersecretary, if you were the secretary, he's so really got a different kind of a wand. You know, what is, you know, a challenge that you would just make vanish, or is it more funding for a certain program? Because there's a lot of different challenges, and we can't solve them all at once, but I am just sort of curious from your perspective and the seats that you sit in, you know, what are some of the things that I can take back that we can work on? Because you'd be surprised in some of these conversations, sometimes the fixes can actually be done administratively through a creative waiver. We've done a lot of that through an interesting pilot that we can test and learn. Some things are, you know, in the senator's wheelhouse legislatively, but you would be surprised, I think, on how much we can do, I think, within our own shop or through the regulatory process. So I would be curious about.
We've got some raised eyebrows. Seth raised his hand first.
What would that be? Yeah.
Sure. So I think #1 is, let's not go backwards. I think RD's got about 580,000 rental units that you're providing rental assistance to across the country. The presence of the rental assistance makes putting additional capital, because of your existing loans that need to be renewed, into those projects. And RD does not have enough capital to reinvest in those projects. So I would say, as you look to potentially decouple your rental assistance from your capital, doing that very thoughtfully and understanding that the low-income housing tax credit program is going to bear the brunt of that responsibility on the other side. When HUD had a similar action, taking their projects through the rental assistance demonstration program, exiting public housing, 43% of those units ended up going to LIHTC for funding and financing. So I hope RD can spend time looking at its portfolio, and if this is an eventuality, that those projects that are already so critical to Vermont's housing stock and our rural communities, that we have a really orderly transfer into other funding streams, because we're going to end up having to refinance, and Patrick probably is going to be looked to help really take on a lot of that portfolio in the future.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that about LiveTech, but we just had several decoupling listening sessions as we think about how to do that right. And there's a lot of different nuances. We're thinking about starting small with a pilot just over a couple of years. Of course, it's a legislative proposal right now, so we don't have the authority to do it, but would love to follow up with you on that sort of case study around LiveTech, just to make sure we're not falling into that same trap. Thank you.
Ben, I saw you.
Just two quick things, and Zach might could actually probably speak to it better than I could, but and Rob was referencing the idea of like mixed use. And, you know, in so many of our like New England historic downtowns, right? It's like store down below and housing up above. Right. And like one of the workforce housing tools that frankly we were never really able to deploy successfully was the 535 loan guarantee the loan guarantee program. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it was because to do that in a downtown, you can't have that mixed use with the 535 program. Right? And it was just kind of like such a bummer. And it speaks to the larger cultural issue of rural business services, rural housing services, rural utility services, like never the twain shall meet kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And like when you actually start to think of just RD as practitioner of community economic development across programs, then I think you can get more done. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Robin, got one?
Yeah, there's a process problem that we have when we think about the public menu of funding. And I thought we were really brilliant when we had 30 different funding sources. Now I'm thinking that was really dumb. Little burst bubble there. But no, you're right. I mean, that's sort of what we have to do. But I think one of the challenges is that there's more programs that I know what to name that could be brought around a building project. And instead of saying, this is the project, how do they come to this? They're sort of laid out in this weird sequencing of like, oh, we're going to use renewable energy. Well, actually, that's for a business, not a nonprofit, but we're acting as a business here. Well, not eligible. The mixed use. So, you know, looking at the how does this become sort of wraparound to a project versus again that sort of long bleed, if you will, of what are the sequencing of different grants, when are they timed, how do they fit together, what's the match for that, and then are you even eligible? So I think about the end goal is not about putting a wood pellet heating system or a high efficiency building envelope in place. The end result is having attainable quality housing. What are the tools being brought to that? So it's kind of reversing the way we tend to have to do it. We go one application at a time and try to bring it and piece the thing together, as opposed to saying, what are the projects or programs that can support this effort, and how do we sequence them at the right time? That said, there might be 90%, 50% of the programs that are ineligible, but in my fantasy world, it's to sort of pivot and say, who's the docent that's helping us to walk through the conversation around the project, the different elements. Oh, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And then knowing us as a developer are unique and saying, we know that's a problem because you can't use the Rural Energy for America program, but let's work around that because you actually have a debt-based structure on this and an exit into the private sector. So, you know, it's just again sort of reversing sort of the process piece that is probably not terribly easy to do, but like makes it easier on the user end to deploy those resources most effectively.
Makes a lot of sense.
Anyone else with your magic wand? Because I do want to make sure that if our press and media friends have any questions, you have a few moments to ask them. Anyone else with magic wands for rural development programs? Ha ha.
Well, I appreciate you not giving your magic wand, but no, you can. But I do want to say that as I've been involved, the consensus about the urgency of this for everyday Vermonters, you know, is really essential. And I think it's there. So, but if you have a consensus that we really have to be looking at workforce housing, and that it has to be integrated into a kind of Vermont tradition of community life. And, you know, somehow we managed to do it with mixed use. I mean, one of the wonderful things about rural Vermont is that you've got a mobile home park next to, you know, some pretty fancy place, and you've got a person with a gas station out in the middle, you know, between two farms, and somehow it works out. I mean, I better shut up here. But my point is that there really is, I think, awareness that it's existential for Vermont to have the workforce housing, because it's just terrible when people can't live anywhere. They can't live anywhere. They can't live close to where they work, and you lose that rural character. So what I'm seeing is the political energy is there in the State House in a way that it hasn't been before. And I'm seeing in DC what we're talking about. I mean, I have red state colleagues, but they would be sitting around in their red state with people who have the same commitment to their community as you do, and they'd be hearing the same things. All right, so we have to wrestle with what's the best policy to get from here to there. But when you're not in denial about the problem, like we were for so long about climate change, let's say, you actually can move forward. The other thing that is actually really wonderful for me to hear about is the refunding and how the infrastructure money, you know, really made a difference, hearing that from town officials and from housing folks. And one of the challenges we have with government is there's no trust there. So people, they don't know, in fact, that a lot of the things that are happening are actually making a difference in the local community. And you're aware of it in a way because there was this money available. One of the big things about a lot of that money to be made available is a bunch of us fought for it to be flexible in the state, so that the decisions about allocation, how to do it, where you need your infrastructure and sewer, that'll be made in St. Johnsbury instead of in Washington or even Montpelier. So that federal money really is necessary, okay? I mean, I actually think that's a proper use of federal funds, but it has to be, I think, in order to be used efficiently, it has to be with a lot of local decision-making on allocation. But in order for there to be local decision-making, there has to be consensus on practical policies to make the best of it. So it's very encouraging for me to hear what you're doing. And, you know, I regard my job as trying to get the resources and the policies that make it possible for you to do your job. And your job is the harder job because yes, I have to work with Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ted Cruz, but you actually have to get the project built, and that's day-to-day overcoming obstacles every day. So I'm very grateful for you for the work you do.
Thank you, Senator. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today. Yeah. If we may, if it's all right with both of you, do our press colleagues have any questions for us as we wrap up our roundtable?
We can do off-topic.
Off-topic after? Okay, great. You know, anybody else? Good. All right.
It's not spring yet. Joe's got his shoes on.
Joe's got his shoes on. That's right. Thank you, Senators. Thank you, Deputy Secretary.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, let's do a group photo.